The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of breathing. October 1931, Chicago Federal Building. Courtroom 542. High ceilings, dark wood paneling. The kind of space designed to make you feel small, to remind you that the law was bigger than any one person, older than any crime, heavier than any defense you could mount. Al Capone sat at the defendant's table in a navy blue suit. His tie was silk. His pocket square was folded precisely. His shoes were polished so thoroughly they reflected the overhead lights. He looked like a businessman, a philanthropist, a man who belonged at a fundraiser, not a federal trial. But everyone in that room knew what he was. The gallery was packed. Reporters in the front rows, notebooks ready, pencils moving before anyone even spoke. Citizens in the back, people who'd waited hours for a seat, who wanted to see the King of Chicago brought low. Federal agents lined the walls. Bailiffs stood at every door. The air smelled like old paper and furniture polish and something sharper, anticipation maybe, or the particular kind of tension that comes when everyone knows they're watching history. The prosecution had spent 3 days laying out the case. Tax evasion, unreported income, money that flowed through speakeasies and gambling dens and brothels, money that bought mansions and cars and politicians, money that was never declared, never taxed, never accounted for in any official record. The evidence was overwhelming. Ledgers, bank statements, testimony from accountants and bookies and bagmen who'd decided that prison was better than a bullet. The government had built a wall of paper so high that no defense could climb over it. Capone's lawyers had tried. They'd argued procedure. They'd challenged witnesses. They'd questioned the chain of custody on documents. But everyone in that courtroom could feel it. The case was solid. The verdict was coming. It was just a matter of time. Judge James Herbert Wilkerson presided, 63 years old. Silver hair, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He'd been on the federal bench for 11 years. He'd heard mob cases before. He'd sentenced killers and extortionists, and men who thought money could buy them out of anything. He had a reputation for being fair but firm. No theatrics, no grandstanding. Just the law applied evenly, without emotion. But there was something else about Wilkerson. Something the lawyers whispered about in the hallways. He didn't like showmen. He didn't like men who strutted into his courtroom like they owned it. He didn't like arrogance. And Al Capone, sitting there in his perfect suit with his perfect tie, looked like arrogance personified. It was late afternoon on the 4th day of trial. The prosecution had just rested. Capone's lead attorney, a man named Albert Fink, had stood to make a motion. Something technical. Something about admissibility. Judge Wilkerson had denied it, without much discussion. Fink sat down. Capone leaned over and whispered something to him. Fink shook his head. Capone whispered again. Fink's face tightened, but he nodded. Then Capone stood up. It wasn't procedure. The defense hadn't called him. There was no question pending. But he stood anyway, and the entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Judge Wilkerson looked up from his notes. "Mr. Capone, please sit down." Capone didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just stood there, hands resting lightly on the table in front of him, looking directly at the judge. Wilkerson set down his pen. "Mr. Capone, I've instructed you to sit." "Your Honor," Capone said quietly, "I'd like to address the court. You'll have that opportunity if your counsel calls you to testify." "I don't need to testify," Capone said. "I just need 1 minute." Fink stood up quickly. "Your Honor, I apologize. My client is." "Your client is out of order," Wilkerson said. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. "Mr. Capone, sit down or I will hold you in contempt." Capone looked at him for a long moment. Then he sat. But something had shifted in the room. You could feel it. A kind of electricity. A sense that something was about to break. The judge returned to his notes. The prosecution conferred quietly at their table. The gallery settled back into their seats. And then Wilkerson did something no one expected. He looked up at Capone. Really looked at him. And he smiled. Not a warm smile. Not a friendly one. A smile that said, I see you. I see what you're trying to do. And it won't work here. Mr. Capone, Wilkerson said, his voice carrying easily across the courtroom, I've been watching you these past few days. You sit there in your fine suits. You whisper to your lawyers. You act as though this is all some minor inconvenience. As though the law is something you can simply negotiate with. Capone said nothing. His face was perfectly still. But the law doesn't negotiate, Wilkerson continued. The law doesn't care how much money you have. It doesn't care how many people you've bought. It doesn't care about your reputation. He paused. Let the silence build. And it certainly, Wilkerson said, his voice dropping just slightly, doesn't care about your scar. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Capone's left hand moved, just a fraction of an inch, toward his face, toward the 3 jagged lines that ran from his ear to his jaw. The scar he'd gotten in a knife fight when he was 22. The scar he told people came from the war. The scar that had become part of his legend. He caught himself. Lowered his hand. Wilkerson leaned back in his chair. You wear it like a badge, don't you? Like it makes you dangerous. Like it makes you someone to be feared. Fink stood up. Your Honor, I must object. Sit down, Counselor. Fink hesitated. Then he sat. Wilkerson kept his eyes on Capone. In this courtroom, Mr. Capone, that scar doesn't make you feared. It makes you marked. It makes you identifiable. It makes you a man who got cut because he wasn't careful, or because he wasn't as tough as he thought. Someone in the gallery coughed. A reporter's pencil scratched against paper. The sound was too loud in the silence. Capone's jaw tightened. Just barely. Just enough. And Judge Wilkerson saw it. Struck a nerve, did I? Wilkerson said softly. For maybe 3 seconds, no one moved. Then Capone stood up again. Slowly this time. Deliberately. He looked at Judge Wilkerson with an expression that was completely unreadable. Not angry. Not defiant. Something else. Something colder. Your Honor, Capone said, and his voice was so quiet that people in the back rows had to lean forward to hear him. You're right about one thing. Wilkerson raised an eyebrow. Oh? The scar doesn't make me dangerous. Capone paused. He touched his face now, lightly, tracing the raised line of tissue with 2 fingers. This scar, he said, is a reminder. Of what? That I survived. The words hung in the air. I got this in a fight, Capone continued. A bad one. The man who gave it to me thought he was ending something. He thought he was teaching me a lesson. He lowered his hand. But I'm still here. And he's not. Wilkerson's face didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. That's the thing about scars, Your Honor, Capone said. They don't make you weak. They prove you didn't break. They prove you kept going when someone else wanted you to stop. He gestured, very slightly toward the judge. You sit up there in your robes, and you talk about the law like it's some holy thing. Like it's perfect, like it's never cut anyone who didn't deserve it. Mr. Capone, but you and I both know that's not true. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the radiator hissing in the corner. The law has scars, too, Capone said. It's just better at hiding them. He paused. You want to put me in prison? Fine. You've got the evidence. You've got the votes. You've probably already written the sentence. He looked directly at Wilkerson. But don't stand there and mock a scar. Don't pretend that surviving something makes a man weak. Because if that's true, Your Honor, then this whole courtroom is full of weak men. And that includes you. Fink was on his feet immediately. Your Honor, I apologize. My client is clearly... No. Wilkerson's voice cut through the noise. He raised one hand, and the room went silent again. Let him finish. Capone took a breath. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, steadier. I've done things I'm not proud of, he said. I've hurt people. I've broken laws. I won't stand here and pretend otherwise. He glanced at the jury, then back at the judge. But I won't apologize for surviving. I won't apologize for the things I had to do to stay alive when no one else cared whether I lived or died. And I won't let any man, judge or not, use my scars as a punchline. He sat down. The silence that followed was enormous. It pressed against the walls. It filled every corner of the room. Judge Wilkerson stared at Capone for a long time. His expression was unreadable. Finally, he picked up his gavel. He didn't bang it. He just held it. Mr. Capone, he said slowly, you're out of order. You've interrupted this court. You've spoken without permission. And you've come dangerously close to contempt. Capone said nothing. But Wilkerson continued, and now his voice was different. Quieter. Almost thoughtful. You're also right. He set the gavel down. I should not have mocked your scar. That was beneath this court. And it was beneath me. The reporters in the front row looked at each other. Someone in the gallery gasped. This trial, Wilkerson said, is about the law, not about personal grudges, not about humiliation. The law is meant to be applied with dignity, even, especially, when the defendant has shown none. He looked at Capone. You will be judged by the evidence, Mr. Capone, not by your appearance, not by your scars, and not by my opinion of your character. He nodded to the prosecution. We'll adjourn for the day. Court will resume tomorrow morning at 9. He stood. Everyone in the courtroom stood with him. He walked out through the door behind the bench without looking back. Capone sat at the defense table for a long time after everyone else had started to leave. Fink was talking to him, but Capone didn't seem to hear. He just sat there, staring at the empty judge's bench, one hand resting lightly against the side of his face. 3 weeks later, the jury came back, guilty on 5 counts of tax evasion. Judge Wilkerson sentenced Capone to 11 years in federal prison, the longest sentence ever handed down for tax evasion at that time. But before he pronounced the sentence, Wilkerson said something that didn't make it into most of the newspapers. He said, Mr. Capone, you are a criminal. You have broken the law repeatedly and without remorse, but you are also a human being. And this court will treat you as such. Capone showed no reaction. He was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. He served 8 years. He was released early for good behavior and declining health. He died in 1947 at the age of 48 in his home in Florida. Judge Wilkerson retired in 1941. He lived quietly. He rarely spoke about his career, but near the end of his life, he gave a single interview to a law journal. The interviewer asked him about Capone, about the trial, about the moment in the courtroom when everything changed. Wilkerson was silent for a long time. Then he said, I learned something that day. I learned that you cannot humiliate a man into justice. You can punish him. You can imprison him. But if you strip him of his dignity, you strip the law of its meaning. He paused. Capone was a monster. But he was right. Scars are proof of survival, and the law should never mock survival. It should only concern itself with truth. The interviewer asked what Capone had said that changed his mind. Wilkerson smiled faintly. He didn't change my mind, he said. He reminded me of something I'd forgotten. What was that? That I'm human too. Today, Wilkerson's statement, you cannot humiliate a man into justice, is taught in law schools across the country. It appears in ethics courses, in judicial conduct seminars, in lectures on the balance between authority and dignity. Most students don't know the full story. They don't know about the scar. They don't know about the courtroom silence. They don't know about the moment when a federal judge admitted, in front of a packed gallery, that he'd been wrong. But the principle remains. The law is not a weapon of humiliation. It is a tool of accountability. And even a man with blood on his hands deserves to be judged with dignity. Not because he's earned it, but because the law is only as good as the way it treats the worst of us. Capone's scar faded over the years. The knife wound healed. But the lesson it taught, accidentally, unwillingly, never did. It's still quoted, still taught, still whispered in courtrooms when a young prosecutor gets too aggressive, or a judge forgets that the bench is not a throne. And sometimes, late at night in law libraries across the country, students read about that trial and wonder what Capone was thinking when he stood up, whether he knew what he was doing, whether he planned it, or whether, for just one moment, he stopped being a gangster and became something else. A man who'd survived too much to let anyone make him feel small, even a judge.